So I just finished the season finale. Now I'll admit I was a bit worried about the season about midway through. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it as much as the other two seasons, but I was wrong to worry. The season finale was fantastic, and this is probably, I don't know if it's my favorite season, but I'd say it's probably the best season, all things considered. So there's two interpretations. One interpretation is that everything we've seen actually happened, and Alice coming face to face with this horrible antler monster, it was such a terrifying sight for her to see the true nature of this god that it broke her brain, and she ended up in the same place as her mom in this mental asylum. Now, the much more likely explanation is that Alice comes to this new place, she starts to see a bunch of things, she sees the graffiti, she sees the taxidermy of her landlord. She hears the stories about the missing kids. She sees Joseph Peach in this meatpacking industry. And from this, she starts to weave this fantasy. And also from her fear, she really fears losing her sister to schizophrenia. So that fear becomes manifest in the fantasy where her sister gets taken. And all of what we see is really just a manifestation of her slowly losing grip with reality. And one hint that this is the case is we see the millipedes that get pulled out of her sister and her. Now we see back in a flashback, we see that she was really scared of millipedes. So again, it's just everything that we see how really it was just kind of a twisted form of some aspect of reality that she twisted into this crazy fantasy. And early on, we got this idea of insidious onset, where one symptom of the disease is not even realizing you have a disease until it's very progressed, and then all of a sudden, at the end of the story, she realizes she has a disease, but it's too late. She's already attacked someone. She's already put herself now in this asylum with her mom. So one of the few things that probably actually did happen was she did attack the student loan person who was tracking her down for the student loan because her mom stabbed her sister, and that's why she got sent to that place. So if she was getting sent to a similar place, she probably did some violent action. So that was probably a reality. Another reality is that her sister Zoe probably did stop taking her medication, start getting lost in this fantasy world, but she pulled back and she decided to start taking her medication again and try to live a normal life in the real world while Alice got lost in this fantasy world and eventually ended up where she did. And it's funny how we get this line of anything's better than going insane, and we see that the fantasy world she constructs for herself is a horrible, nightmarish world of demons and bloodthirsty gods. But for her, this fantasy world where she's trying to save her sister from this nightmare, to us it looks like a nightmare, but to her it's better than the actual bleak reality where she's just a crazy person now with her crazy mom in this very drab, dreary, almost prison-like environment. So it's funny how sometimes these outlandish nightmares we create for ourselves, they may look really bad, but really the bleak and in some ways more boring but sadder reality is even worse. So let's look at what the fantasy actually was, because I think there's some very interesting ideas. Now, in some sense, we had this theme of her actually seeing the true nature of God, and in some sense the true nature of the cosmos and of the universe. So now we think of the universe at a fundamental level, is it a place of harmony and cooperation, or at a fundamental level is the universe a cold, uncaring place? Early on, a character says the universe is just one big random act of violence, and is the fundamental nature of reality one where the strong prey on the weak, and there's food chains and apex predators, and this kind of predator-prey, kill or be killed, survival of the fittest, might makes right? Is that the fundamental nature of the universe? And is seeing that truth and realizing we live in such an unfair, cruel world, is that enough to drive anyone crazy? And is that the cause of mental illness or certain kinds of mental illness, is just recognizing the true nature of reality, having it be so different than her ideals? And you see her at the beginning, she's very idealistic, wants to change things, wants to help people, and is coming face to face with the true nature of reality so different from her ideals. Is that what would drive anyone crazy? So what actually happened many years ago, at least in the fantasy, it's unclear. So the Peaches, they lost two of the daughters of the family. Now, originally it seemed like they lost the daughters to people in the town, and that's why they were preying on the town as a form of revenge. But that doesn't seem true. It seems that either they lost the daughters because they themselves sacrificed the daughters to this god because they wanted immortality or any of the other benefits, or it seems like they lost their daughters and then the grief was so strong it drove them to make this deal with this god because they couldn't handle anything so terrible ever happening again. But anyways, this god demands sacrifices, and what I loved was the foreshadowing. So when Mama Peach is teaching her kids about the food chain and how we eat other animals because it's just to eat animals below us, that's a parallel to how this God is an even higher being, preys on humans and probably eats them the same way that we would eat animals, as a kind of lower being, at least in the God's point of view. So I love how we get that, and we also get this idea of a God that's hungry and demands sacrifices. Now, this conception of God isn't very common today, but in olden days, it was the widespread idea of a god was one that did demand sacrifices and demanded blood, and we get that with fertility cults, we get that with Aztecs, human sacrifice, we even get that in the Old Testament a lot, this idea of sacrifice, not human sacrifice, but sacrifice nonetheless. And we also get this idea of, because the world is so cruel and it's this dog-eat-dog world, strong figures can manipulate people's vulnerabilities, and they can say, look, they can go to vulnerable people, especially children. We see the theme of children prevalent a lot here. They can go to them and say, look, the world is so cruel and there's death and all these awful things. I can take those things away, and I can offer you a better world, a fantasy world where these things don't exist. And we see how the strong can prey on the weak in a different way. They can prey on them in a bloodthirsty way by actually killing them, but they can also prey on them by offering them a kind of fantasy where their troubles, their mortality, their mental illness, whatever it is, they can take those things away for a price. And then there's the idea of cannibalism, and Mama Peach, she says at one point, if you don't eat and you're hungry, eventually your body just starts to eat itself. She says it happens to vegetarians all the time. So there's this idea that if you don't take part in the fundamental nature of reality, and you don't take part in this game of eating the weaker, all these like aggressive drives that are just inherent to us, they're going to be turned inwards. And we see this with Zoe's self-harm. We see this more broadly with the metaphor of like cannibalism and communities or towns just starting to eat themselves. So there's this idea that, look, you either have to prey on the weak, you either have to help the stronger prey on the weak and form this subservient relationship to someone stronger, or you're just destined to cannibalize and eat yourself and turn all these aggressive instincts inward. Now, comparing this to other seasons, I feel like season 1, Candle Cove, it had a lot of just standard creepy, unsettling elements, and it was the most creepy, unsettling, most kind of traditional horror. Season 2 was more of like a mind fuck that really got you thinking, reminded you of a Twilight Zone episode. It was kind of the most conceptual, kind of like sci-fi. This season was the most just surreal, absurd, incomprehensible horror, very Lynchian. And it's interesting comparing this to Twin Peaks, not comparing, but you can't help but notice in this show there was the little person that was dressed all in red, and at one point it was even dancing a jig. Now, you can't help but compare that to the iconic Twin Peaks scene, and then when we see the god and we see the face revealed to be just this silver thing, very similar to what we saw in the new season of Twin Peaks, where they're in the red room and the face gets ripped off and it's silver. So kind of just an interesting little connection there. Also, the red lips we see in the show, not since Cheryl Blossom off Riverdale have I seen anything like that. Now, a few more questions that I actually don't know. So the scissor lady, the crazy scissor lady that we see early on, what was up with her? I think she was just in there because for us, she was very scary and unsettling, kind of represented danger. So for us, there was one kind of horror, but when the sisters saw that, for them, that could be their future, because in some sense, she's someone who's completely lost her marbles, lost touch with reality. So for them, who are struggling with those mental health issues, she kind of represents not only just a scary physical danger, but also this warning sign and this sign of the path that they could go down, and God forbid that becomes them at some point. And then other questions, we see the creature, I'll put a photo of it up, that has its skin all completely flayed off. Now, I'm really not sure what this creature is. Now, we see it seems to preside over these ceremonies when you go through, not the initial white door at the top of the staircase that leads to this summer house of eternal paradise, but when you go inside the house in this field, and then you go down and there's the red door, and this leads to the altar where they seem to do these sacrifices. Now we see the skin-flayed creature, we see him presiding over these sacrifices at one point. So it's unclear what role he plays, maybe just kind of the henchman of this god, or the number 2 of this god. And then also these little people, these creatures we see running around, it's unclear what they are as well. Are they children that got sacrificed and they come back in this demonic form? I have no idea. If anyone has any ideas in the comments, definitely leave a comment. But I thought this was a great season. Again, a little worried about it initially, but they really pulled everything together with the ending. I thought that a lot of the ending was kind of explanation, exposition, lore, if you will. So I thought it was a great way to end a very confusing season where you didn't really know what was going on. Very satisfying conclusion. So great season. Very happy with it.